Welcome everyone to this edition of the Hunt Institute's Postsecondary Pathways webinar. We're excited that you're with us. We'll give participants and audience members about 2 more minutes to get logged in and get set up. 2 minutes and then we'll get started. As we're letting people on, I'm afraid we're going to have low turnout from North Carolina with Duke currently being in a battle with Syracuse right now. People might end up about 20 minutes late trying to watch the end of that one. So lots of UNC fans will be on here. They're probably rooting for Syracuse right now. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're excited for this conversation. If you haven't been with us for a Post-Secondary Pathways webinar before, welcome. This is the Hunt Institute's virtual events, specifically the one put on by the higher education team. So we're excited for this conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about name, image, and likeness, how the NCAA's rule change affects institutions of higher education and their students. We've got a great panel today, including Mr. Scott Beerby from General Counsel at National Collegiate Athletic Association, also known as NCAA, Dr. Ezanine Ofabu from Santa Clara University, and Dan Axman from SAS. So we're excited for this conversation today and hope that it's enlightening on name, image, and likeness. As we get started, if you'd like to follow along on social media or tweet about today's webinar, please use the hashtag #PostPathways. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at the Hunt Institute. So feel free to share and you'll be kept up to date with all the stuff we have going on. Now, as we turn to the actual event, the actual webinar, I look forward to bringing this discussion to our 3 resource experts. We know that it's March Madness has really started to take hold. There's already been numerous last second buzzer beaters. If you're a basketball fan like me, this is your favorite time of the year. Not great for my sleep, but it's great for some excitement. But given that it's March and March Madness, we know that conversations around student athletes and their support is paramount. And so in particular, in this discussion, we wanted to focus on the NCAA's name, image, and likeness policy and how it affects post-secondary students. On June 30th, 2021, the NCAA approved an interim policy that allows students to make money off their name, image, and likeness, which you'll also hear referred to as NIL. That was effective July 1st. The interim policy rescinded longstanding rules that prohibited student athletes from making money through endorsements and other forms of selling and monetizing their name and rights. Now, over the last 9 months, governors in 28 states have signed legislation or issued executive orders looking at the regulations around name, image, and likeness. Last night alone, Kentucky's governor signed a new bill on name, image, and likeness. So we are in a fresh discussion of what name, image, and likeness looks like for students on campus, what it looks like for state policy, and where the future of it's going to go. So I'm excited to start this conversation. So without further ado, I want to bring in our resource experts. So Scott, we'll come to you first. Thanks for being here. Scott is General Counsel at the NCAA. Scott, I wanted to come to you first to help provide a little more background about this decision to change the policy. I provided a few details in the intro, but I'm hoping you can help us better understand name, image, and likeness policy and what factors the NCAA considered when implementing the policy.
Sure. Thanks, Wynn, and hello, everyone. Thanks for the chance to be with you all today. Yeah, so the NCAA, first and foremost, it probably is a good refresher to just say what the NCAA is and isn't. And so when you think about the NCAA and you think about the basketball championships about to get underway, when we think about policy, those are made by all our member schools. And sometimes they are made at a national association wide, meaning the smallest Division III to the largest Division I. And they do that through a board. And in other cases, Division I makes a specific set of policies. II might do something a little different, and Division III might not have a policy at all. So, while we as staff are involved in all of those conversations, the decisions around name, image, and likeness are made by your very member schools. And so that's how all policy happens at the NCAA level. So you have to go back to October of 2019, when the NCAA's board of governors, mostly presidents of universities, advocated that the divisions enact NIL opportunities, that the policies change to allow for the student athlete to be more like the regular student. If you're an influencer, you should be able to be an influencer. If you have a social media presence, you should be able to monetize that. And so a group of subject matter experts, if you will, from around the different athletic departments, then spent about a year coming up with policies. And it was at the time that the membership was going to vote on those in January of 2020, when governmental interest in what the NCAA was about to do caused the association to pause. We had gotten a letter from the Department of Justice saying, we want to know more about this name, image, and likeness set of policies you have. And so prudently, the membership paused. Meanwhile, as you described, when a variety of states started getting into the act, and the legislatures began developing their own policies and their own state laws. And so while the association wanted to move forward, it was very difficult to do so on a national basis because the state laws were different. And at that point, Congress chose not to get involved, even though there still remains a great amount of interest there. So at the end of the day, what you see is an interim policy that is deferential to the state laws. And we'll talk later about what those state laws are and whether they're going to hold, or whether they're going to, in essence, be rescinded, as some of them have been already. So very deferential to where state law exists, but also deferential to the school. School policies may, in some instances, want to allow licensing of their marks, their mascot. In other places, they may not. And so the policy doesn't address those usual types of things that the NCAA regulates. It does not regulate in that same way that our schools are used to. And so we're left with a very deferential policy where we're trying to figure out if pay for play and improper inducement are essentially the remaining rules, and then trying to peek a little bit into rules around booster engagement with prospective student athletes, where those bylaws are bumping into NIL transactions being offered by those same boosters. So there's a lot of really good stuff happening around name, image, and likeness. But there's also, I think, some remaining concern by our schools.
Great. Thank you for that, Scott. I think that's important context to really help understand, why we see the hodgepodge of laws and regulations. And as we dive deeper into supporting students, I look forward to exploring how those different rules, might affect the way a student who's 17, 18 coming out of high school really thinks about where they're going to college, or, what that looks like. So thank you for that background. Dr. Elphabu, I want to come to you next because I do want to dive deeper into that student support. So you're assistant professor of educational leadership at Santa Clara University, and your work focuses on the intersection of race and gender, particularly the experiences of Black women in various aspects of college athletics and higher education. So thank you for being here. I wanted to focus on that area, your area of expertise for a moment. How has the policy change on name, image, and likeness affected female student athletes, and in particular, Black female student athletes?
Yes, thank you for that question. First and foremost, hello everyone from I'm in California, so I'm struggling with whether to say good morning or good afternoon. But thank you for having me as a part of this conversation. And I want to start by saying that NIL in regards to women athletes, I think has further demonstrated how profitable women's college sports is, and how there is a market for women athletes when we're thinking about the business of college sports. Particularly women's basketball, swimming and diving, volleyball are amongst the top sports for NIL compensation. And I think a lot of folks were expecting football and men's basketball to really be leading the charge here. But women with large social media presences and followings have really been able to cash in on these NIL deals. In the year since NIL's implementation, women athletes across sports have been able to secure deals with recognizable brands such as Gatorade, Chipotle, and Boost Mobile. And when you look at this policy or this policy interpretation and its implementation intersectionally, which is what my research does, really looking at the intersections of race and gender, white women in particular have been able to cash in and profit from this policy in ways that Black women and other women athletes of color have not. So for example, some athletes, women athletes with the most profitable NIL deals are Paige Becker, who plays basketball for the University of Connecticut, Haley and Hannah Cavendar, who play basketball for Fresno State University here in California, and Olivia Dunn, who is a gymnast at Louisiana State University. And these are all white women. When you put a microscope to women's basketball in particular, these intersections become even more glaring because women's basketball is a sport that is predominantly Black across all division levels and at the professional levels when you're looking at leagues like the WNBA. But the women with the most profitable NIL deals in this sport are white women. Getting even more deeper into those intersections, Aaliyah Boston, for example, who plays basketball at the University of South Carolina, is arguably the best women's basketball player in the country. But we do not see Aaliyah Boston with six-figure NIL deals. And the media attention that she receives definitely do not replicate or support that idea that she is the best player in the country. So this is not the first time that, when we look at a policy's impact intersectionally, that you see that it's skewing heavily towards a single axis approach of looking at equity, right? For example, Title IX is a policy that has been implemented for the last 50 years. And during that time, white women coaches, administrators, and athletes have benefited from its implementation at a much greater rate than Black women and other women athletes of color. To bring that conversation back to NIL, this could be for a number of reasons. The biggest one that comes to mind are European standards of beauty that kind of dictate who gets to be profitable or who is marketable or deserving to be the face of something. Many Black women are embracing their natural beauty, enjoying and embracing the skin that they're in, wearing their hair in natural styles, and all of these ways that are not historically considered beautiful, which speaks to that first point about who companies are approaching and why. It's no different from what Black women professional athletes and Black women entertainers experience when they are rejected or overlooked for certain endorsement deals or roles because they are too dark or their skin or their hair is too kinky or too curly. So I say all that to say that the implementation of NIL has provided a means for student athletes to get in on the business of college sports, which is important because for so long money was funneled away from students. But there's still so much work that needs to be done when we're thinking about intersectional equity in college sports, particularly in regards to race and gender. How this policy has been received and interpreted by different brands and organizations is seemingly just another manifestation of anti-Blackness in college sports, in my opinion. Before NIL, Black bodies were controlled and commodified to generate revenue. And with this legislation, it's now providing another way for sports media and other organizations to tell us how they value Black bodies and how they communicate who gets to benefit from some of these lucrative NIL deals.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Elfabu. I think that's such a powerful position to raise, particularly as we know there are inequalities that still exist throughout athletics and throughout higher education in general. And so when we're creating this somewhat new system of NIL, how do we intentionally embed equity practices in it? And I think that's a conversation that has to happen at the state level, at the institution level as well. So thank you for raising those. We know we have a lot more work to do on that. Dan, I want to bring you into this conversation. We're going to go a slightly different way, but I promise to our audience it does back up to student athletics. But Dan is Senior Sports Industry Analytics Advisor at SAS. SAS is a great partner of the Hunt Institute, so we really appreciate you being here. Dan has vast experience with athletic data analytics and recently wrote a 5-part series entitled College Athletic Insights. In part 5 in particular, he explored team optimization and performance in the midst of NIL. My colleague's actually going to share that link to Dan's writing in the chat. But Dan, just hoping that you could tell us a little bit more about what sports data analytics is in college athletics. You know, when I think of it, I think of them talking about pulling the little sheet out to look at if you should go for 2 points or 1 point when, college football. But I know there's much more to it. So can you tell us a little bit more about it and then how you anticipate it being applied to college athletics through NIL?
Thanks, Wynn, and thank you to the Hunt Institute for having me join today. And I should say, first and foremost, calling in from the Raleigh area of North Carolina, and I'm going to stay out of the local March Madness debates between a few of the schools, but my wife went to University of Miami, so we are only allowed to root for Miami this time of the year, in the tournament. But for those who may not be familiar with SAS, if I could just take a quick moment and introduce SAS as a global leader in data and analytics. And our sole mission in life is to help organizations, both in the public and private sector, governments, understand their data better and make better decisions from it. And like you said, when we talk about sports analytics, and whether it's collegiate sports or professional sports for that matter, usually we go right to that Moneyball conversation, and we're talking about student athlete or athlete performance, both on and off the playing field, and creating competitive advantages from understanding our data, whether it's on the athlete level, whether it's on the team or performance level, whether team sports or Olympic sports. And that's certainly one of the first big pillars. The second pillar is around fan and donor engagement, much like in the retail or hospitality industry or banking for that matter. We help organizations understand their data around their customers and constituents, and in collegiate athletics, understanding fan and donors and the value that they bring to the university and to the brand. And based on historical data, what they may do in the future, both from a transactional level, but also to help communicate with fans and donors and constituents, and sending the right message at the right time through the right channels. So as we steer now into what will certainly become a third big pillar under the collegiate sports analytics umbrella, we have NIL. And like we were talking about prior to the call starting, certainly the wild, wild west, this is all very new. We're only several months into it. And when we talk about data and significance of data, there's certain areas that I think we can say data will be significant quicker. And, you know, we talk about things like descriptive analytics versus predictive or prescriptive. So in one area of analytics, especially as it affects or impacts areas of higher education outside of the athletic department, I think we're going to be in that descriptive mode for a little while. And not that there's a set number of years worth of data to make something significant, but a lot of times you like to see a couple years or 2, 3, 4, or 5, you know, depending on what you're analyzing. On the other side, when it comes to the obvious and where most of the NIL attention is being placed right now around the transactional information, of course, what companies are offering deals, what are the size of the deals, anything attached to data from social media and branding. And of course, when it comes to social media specifically and the different platforms, these student athletes have had data build up in that historical data over the last several years. So I think on that aspect of name, image, likeness, companies like SAS and others will be able to analyze and to do predictive analytics more so than in some of the data that's coming out outside of the athletic department. And when we talk about and kind of steer a little bit away from the sports side of things, you know, when SAS works with institutions of higher education or K through 12 or state departments of education, you know, one of our missions in life is to see students of all ages and learners of all ages succeed. And that's certainly going to be one of the most important areas of focus that universities and the systems and colleges and the systems that they have in place right now to collect all types of data as it relates to this topic, to start to analyze some of the new data that will come into it. And not to get too technical, but it can be as simple as starting right now and creating some additional identifiers that flag a student that's also a student athlete to one that's now engaged in NIL deals, and to see how that impacts other areas of data and analytics. So student success, university reputation, of course, comes in the form of rankings, as we all know a lot. I'll probably defer to Scott on this one, but legal ramifications at the institution level and based how state law differs from state to state around NIL. Anything related to admissions and recruiting. One of the stories I read recently was around, and it could be an edge case, but will student athletes select schools when they know they're going to get a lucrative NIL deal because that state doesn't have a state income tax? And we've seen that in professional sports. So, you know, again, it might be an edge case, but, you know, these are the things and the topics and the thought-provoking topics that come up as it relates to data. Financial aid is certainly a big one. You see some stats out there that, you know, approximately about 80% of student athletes receive some kind of additional aid in the form of scholarship, possibly upwards of about 45 to 50% of the athletes will get some type of need-based aid like a Pell Grant. So when you're looking at those things, there will certainly be data that over time will become significant, we think, around that, and something that colleges and universities have to plan for. Financial transparency is going to be a big one. And, you know, lastly, you know, getting back to the fundraising side of the university, and I think Scott alluded to donors and boosters, will NIL change the way that money is given to the university, or in this case, to the athletes? So whether it's donors that donate through corporations or like businesses, whether small or large, will those donors start to move money in one direction or the other? And will that change the landscaping of some of those, or the landscape rather, of some of those fundraising, you know, stats that we see? So I know we'll unpack some of these things in the coming minutes on the call. but certainly a lot of impacts to higher education outside of the athletic department.
Thank you for that, Dan. Absolutely right that it's the Wild West, and you know, naming some things that I hadn't even personally thought about. You know, studied property taxes and state income taxes, and not even thought about how, you know, students might have to take that into account. So lots of things out there we're still figuring out. And before I come back to you, Scott, I want to just remind our audience we do have a Q&A function in the chat. Please feel free to drop your questions in. We'll get to audience questions in a minute. And panelists, I think we'll try to keep this round of questions to maybe 3 minutes or so, just so we have some Q&A time. But Scott, I want to come back to you first, because there, you know, Dr. Ofabu and Dan have both, you know, mentioned some of the things that may be concerns. We've had NIL for about 8 months. There's also been some positive things that came out of it. So can you tell us what some of the benefits you've seen so far, and where there's some places we can strengthen support for students?
Yeah, sure. I believe the fact that the student athlete can now engage in activities similar to the regular student, that's a huge plus for students in all divisions. You know, I think the ability to develop your own personal brand, the ability to be entrepreneurial. This is an era of incredible opportunity that just didn't exist 10 years ago, perhaps even 5. And the way technology can be harnessed, the way business incubators can be started, and to associate, you know, the student's own work product with that is a huge advancement. I do appreciate the challenges and some of the built-in marketing biases and preferences that are just, you know, apparent in all forms of marketing. And so the institutions, our schools, really have a challenge, because, you know, on the one hand, we're saying to students, go forth and be entrepreneurial, use the resources you need, retain the people who you want around you, and they should advise you appropriately. But those resources aren't available to everyone. And yet the institution has to be, you know, understand that they're not part of a transaction. They are perhaps going to help facilitate, they're perhaps going to line up a potential opportunity, but, you know, to insert yourself into a business activity of a student it has ethical challenges, and it has contractual challenges and other forms that just really need to be addressed. And so I think that's where institutions have a great wish to help, and I think you're going to see more of that. But there also is a recognition that these are student initiatives, and while, you know, there are Title IX consequences for the school to be involved in, and yet we've got to find those resources for young people to be able to access them.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I guess one of the themes I hear permeating, you know, throughout is that this is not going to be anything settled in the next year or the next 6 months, and that it's going to take active, you know, student affairs professionals and workers on the institutions to really stay up to date on the way things are changing to provide the support for students. So thank you for that. Dan, I'll come to you really quick, and then Dr. Ofabu, I think your question will play off of Dan. But you know, ultimately, our work at the Hunt Institute, we're thinking about post-secondary completion, you know, post-secondary attainment. And if you've watched college athletics, you've probably seen the statistic that less than 2% of college athletes will go pro, or what is it, 98% will go pro in something other than sports. And so that's a large group of population that we're you know, wanting to make sure they attain that post-secondary degree or credential. So Dan, in the data that you're looking at, what are some of the stop gaps that we should put in place, looking at student data, to really make sure we're supporting students and making early intervention?
Well, the two areas, and again, kind of going back and maybe to unpack the first being student athlete or student success and outcomes academically, and the second, now, a very important topic around athletes, in all parts of the industry with mental health. But, with SAS, so going back to the question, the universities, the colleges have systems in place where they are tracking a lot of this data, and where SAS intersects with them is, helping them understand that data better, as opposed to, and just to distinguish a little bit, SAS going out and grabbing information publicly. But in our work with institutions of higher education, especially around student success and student outcomes, some of those areas that we are looking at and that the schools, of course, are looking at are things like graduation rates and credit hour production, time to degree, academic performance, and anything that can be done to provide early alerts or warning systems when students or student athletes in this case are at risk. So certainly, and speaking to folks both inside the athletic department and the athletic academic administrators and folks outside of the athletic department and university admin, those are going to be some of the places that data is analyzed first. When it comes to mental health concerns, this is a big challenge because there's a lot of unknowns right now. The data is so new, and when it comes to health data, it's not something that's as easily brought to the forefront to be analyzed. But of course, some of the things that are being talked about now are just an additional increase or pressure and anxiety to perform and stay on top. Will students and student athletes, or student athletes in this case, spend more time on their mobile devices, or will the percentages of time that they spend now shift where they'll spend more time on NIL, branding activities through social media platforms? So again, an unknown, but that's something that will be able to be tracked a little bit quicker. And I think, when it comes to the predictive side of analytics, we'll be able to do more there. And then a lot of the things around mental health also, you have concerns on what happens on the playing field in the locker room. So you start to steer back towards, the sports analytics side of the data as well. But, academically, at the epicenter of all this, student athletes are still going to have to meet certain educational requirements. So education will always continue to be at the forefront, whether that's around GPA requirements or progress towards their degree. And that's why, again, I say that's where a large portion of the focus is going to be, because that doesn't disappear because of NIL.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dan. And you mentioned those intervention systems. I think one of the things we know those exist, so we don't have to recreate the wheel. So how can we tailor them to the student athlete? We know that early intervention, disaggregated data are incredibly integral parts of, making sure a student succeeds. And so how do we cater those to athletics? So I appreciate that. Dr. Ofubu, I'm going to come to you. And I think it's kind of going to touch on Karen's question in the chat as well, because Karen asked Karen mentioned that colleges and universities are providing guidance to student athletes around NIL, but how are those student affairs professionals receiving training? And that's kind of where I wanted to go with the question for you. You as a scholar practitioner, Dr. Ofubu, work in higher education and higher education professionals. So what can we do to prepare higher ed practitioners and leaders to support student athletes, particularly students of color?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great question. And I think in many ways, my response will build on to what Dan has already said. But I think particularly when we're talking about Black athletes and other athletes of color, it's important to support these students in culturally relevant ways. Last year, myself and some colleagues published a paper about leveraging athletes' community cultural wealth to prepare them for life after sport. Now, what does that look like? Many athletes of color come into the college environment with aspirations, possibly to play their sport professionally, but also aspirations beyond playing the game, aspirations that are informed by their cultural background, a familial legacy in some way, shape, or form. So as practitioners, it's important to ask ourselves, how can I leverage these different cultural assets and resources that my students already have? How can I leverage them and continue to support their development now in this athletic space, so that when they leave this environment, they're able to interview for the job that they've wanted since they were 5, or interview for pursue whatever opportunity they came into this environment to pursue. So sometimes that may look like, asking questions about like, what is your end game here, right? What are your career aspirations? How can I best support you academically to make sure that the classes that you are taking in some way, shape, or form align with those career aspirations? One of the big phenomenons in college sports is this idea of academic clustering that adversely affects student athletes of color at a greater rate than it does other populations of student athletes. And one of the ways that phenomenon can be mitigated is by asking these intentional advising questions and providing spaces for mentorship so that student athletes are being connected to former student athletes who are now in their respective fields who look like them, right? Creating opportunities for alumni to give back and be a resource for current student athletes so that they can see themselves doing something other than playing their sport when they leave the college environment. And then in regards to NIL in particular, I think something that's really important is financial literacy, right? Especially when we're thinking about the racial wealth gap and the implications that this could potentially have on Black athletes and athletes of color in general, beginning to develop generational wealth. Right? Our athletes need to be thinking about concepts like budgeting, saving, investing, and the tax implications of these NIL deals. I know when I was in undergrad, I was not thinking about income tax at all. So I can only imagine that these 18, 20-something-year-olds are potentially signing these deals and not thinking about, at the beginning of the year next year, I might have to give some of this money back, right? So I think it's important to get them, to prepare them to make some of these big financial decisions that are ultimately going to have a long-term impact on their ability to develop generational wealth far beyond their time as a student athlete. And then finally, I just want to say that being able to profit off of name, image, and likeness is only one of the ways, or not being able to profit off of name, image, and likeness is only one of the ways that athletes were being exploited or have been exploited within this college sports system. So removing this barrier is a very important and meaningful first step. And my concern is that it places responsibility of securing compensation, securing these equitable opportunities for their labor on the student athletes. So as institutions and even the NCAA, some responsibility has to be taken to ensure that student athletes are adequately being compensated for their labor, or adequately prepared to pursue, adequately prepared to pursue careers that are relevant to them and meaningful to them outside of college sports. Because they're only a student athlete for so long. They are themselves for the rest of their lives. So they need to be able to secure that internship, secure that full-time role, secure that degree beyond what any NIL deal can provide them. So it's important at the end of the day to make sure that, yes, this is an opportunity that exists, but the bigger opportunity here is to receive an education. And we need to continue to prioritize that and make sure that it is an equitable and just experience for them while they are with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And then the part about the generational wealth, I think that really just hit home. That's, been a conversation that has been in the news, in people's minds for a while, but the idea that we want to create that generational wealth rather than allowing it to continue the inequities that we've seen in the past. So Thank you for naming that. We've had some great questions come in. So what I'll do, I think we've got a few that I'm going to point one to each of you if you maybe have a minute or two to answer these. Dan, since Dr. Opabu mentioned careers, one of our in the chat, one of our attendees asked about, how do we support students to explore opportunities in majors that allow them careers in sports analytics? Just wanted to ask you if you had a minute or two about, how we might provide those opportunities for students. And then Scott, I'll come to you with the next question.
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite topics to speak about. And I think Wendy had asked this question, so thank you. When I speak to sports analytics clubs or undergrad or graduate programs at schools, right now, forget about Wild Wild West, but this industry is booming. If you were to peruse LinkedIn specifically over the past several months, you would see dozens and dozens and dozens of jobs around data and analytics and analyst type positions, both for collegiate athletics and professional sports. Collegiate athletics certainly catching up where professional sports has kind of led the way, but that's changing very quickly. When it comes to the types of programs or mechanisms to become involved, for as much as sports is thrown in front of the descriptor of analytics, it can be helping student athletes, discover, and depending on what their majors are, again, the sports analytics clubs or the business analytics clubs or programs, it can be marketing or management or advertising and some of the other areas, finance, of course, that still have an impact on the sports industry. So, a lot of times people will make an assumption that to be involved in analytics, you have to be that engineer, that very, very technical person. And that's not always the case, because you can have very successful careers around any industry, both on the technical side or not. But in sports analytics, you might be that engineer or that programmer and that data scientist, and anything statistics related as far as a major is very important. But you could also steer down a path of sales or business development, or more of a customer advisory type position, or sales engineer, where you know enough to be dangerous, a cliche statement, but you have some technical capabilities, but you also are a good storyteller, which is another piece to the puzzle, especially around data and analytics. So I think how I'll leave that question is, for those that are in programs that are allowing them to potentially to pursue a career in analytics or sports analytics for that matter, go out there. As far as the sports industry is concerned, there's more publicly available data, whether it be Major League Baseball, the NBA, WNBA, and the other sports, and learn how to analyze it and visualize it and build up your portfolio in the LinkedIn platforms of the world, specifically that one, and tell your story about the analysis that you're working on. And it's something that's so important, especially for students right now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dan. And we fully expect to see that industry and that focus area continuing to grow. So always great to see more students coming out interested in the analytics space. Scott, I want to come to you. There have been a couple of questions in the chat about supporting students that are in high school. I don't want to get into name, image, and likeness at high school. I think we'd be pontificating about what that might look like. But I want to think about students that are interested in going to play college athletics. How do we inform students looking at college athletics and their families about NIL, and how can we support them?
Yeah, great question. And I do think, the entrepreneurial opportunities, right, are starting at younger ages, and the role of parent and other family structure support, where those where those exist, and that does put some pressure on high schools where those family structures don't exist, because they're minors by and large, making deals around their image. We all know the positive side of social media, digital platforms, but we also know the ugly side. And so it as a father of two teenagers myself, it is really challenging to deal with. How do you encourage that exploration and delving into opportunity that also involve athletics? So, for a college student, a prospective college student making a school choice, now it is a reality that there may well be a financial incentive to attend a particular school or to go to a particular region. But does that fit within some of the values and the higher ed long-term goals that are intended to that higher ed supports, right? So you can make the quick dollar now, but is that really the long-term best interest? And it's certainly not mutually exclusive. But what we see in studies done is the average student athlete long-term does have higher income than the non-athlete. By and large, in some of the studies done, are healthier and are happier than the non-athlete. Now, there are a lot of pressures on athletes, and certainly you can't make broad pronouncements, but you'd hate to see that, the generational wealth idea, you'd hate to see that eroded because of a sort of incentive that is purely financial based that may not necessarily fit within what the student really needs from an educational standpoint, from a family support standpoint. So long answer is, I think it's a real challenge. It certainly is something that a college should be mindful of as they recruit a young person. And again, those high school resources become really, really important. The counselor, the academic counselor, the college counselor, may well be the influencer in a young person's life.
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. And we have conversations at the state level all the time about the college going process and how to support students and their families. And I think it would be naive to not consider this a part of that conversation and what that college going process looks like, particularly for athletes in high school that are considering it in college. So really appreciate that. Dr. Ofabu, I'm going to come to you with one final main question, and then I think we'll close it out with just a little popcorn question for everyone, nothing too crazy. But I saw Darlita in the chat ask about, how we think NIL will influence places like an HBCU. I want to expand that a little bit to include all MSIs, minority serving institutes. We have Hispanic serving institutions, and all sorts of types of institutions, particularly aimed at a certain student population and supporting their success. The other little context I want to add, I think, as I've been hearing this conversation, I think when people think name, image, and likeness, they think they're going to see, a college athlete on a Coca-Cola commercial, in the middle of NCAA. But some of these are, billboards at home. They're a restaurant down the street from the school. So it's not necessarily that big national platform. And so how do you see NIL influencing minority serving institutions like HBCUs and HSIs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great question. And I want to start by saying that MSIs in general, research has demonstrated that these spaces provide cultural and social support for racially minoritized student groups, despite in many ways being under-resourced and underfunded federally. So with the resources that they have, they're still able to create an environment where racially underrepresented students in higher education are able to see themselves in each other and faculty, staff on these campuses. And I think this is something, thinking historically, that HBCUs have been doing for the last over 100 years, right? Providing this environment for Black students in particular, despite in many ways not receiving the support necessary or the support that is proportional to the support that predominantly and historically white institutions have received. So thinking about this in the context of NIL and student athlete recruitment, I think in the past, student athletes have have went with PWIs over other MSIs, HBCUs, because of the perceived opportunities and exposure that they feel that they can get at a PWI that maybe has more academic support staff, for example, or student athlete development staff, that maybe has new high tech, all of the, bright and shiny things in regards to facilities. These are not necessarily things that under-resourced institutions have access to because, again, that federal support disparity. But something that I think that NIL is going to have a big impact on is when we're thinking about institutions like Jackson State, which the question mentioned, and recruits like Travis Hunter, who was the #1 recruit in the country, I believe, and flipped from a PWI to Jackson State. I think with those big recruits, and with any recruits in general, they're going to start to, not to start to see the value, but the value of being at a HBCU is going to be even more glaring, because if NIL allows them to bring whatever opportunities, ultimately their name, image, and likeness with them wherever they go, right? So it's not necessarily that, oh, I have to be at this institution to garner this exposure so that I can get drafted. It's maybe I can be at whatever institution because people are going to see my name, they're going to see my image and know that, wherever I go, I'm going to be the best person to represent their brand, right? And Travis Hunter recently signed an NIL deal with a Black-owned coffee company. So he's still able to secure these large NIL deals, being that he, committed to an HBCU. And I think that trend is going to continue, where recruits are understanding the value that they have, regardless of what institution that they go to. And it's going to give them more autonomy to choose their college based on where they feel they would be the most culturally and socially supported, as opposed to where they feel they would have the most exposure or access to all of these different things that PWIs have historically always had access to.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's great. And I'm going to shamelessly plug, if anyone on here is interested in supporting HBCU students, we have a webinar coming up in a couple of weeks looking at supporting student body presidents at HBCUs. So would love to have people come. This has been a great conversation. I know there have been a few more questions come in that we're not going to have time to get to. Didn't expect to answer all the questions, rather just start a conversation now. And hopefully this has sparked in people's minds some areas they want to dive deeper into. I know for me, it's sparked some intentional conversations that I want to start to have and for our team to explore. But as we close out, one of my colleagues told me that I should ask each of you, I'm not going to, but I'm going to ask the chat to drop them in. Colleagues asked me to get each of you to go on record for who your March Madness selection is for the men and women. I'm not going to make you do that because I know there's some ties to NC State and all sorts of things, but chat, if you want to drop those in, feel free. But what I do want to do to close this out, we'll go to Scott, then Dan, and then I'll finish with Dr. Ofabu. But just want to ask what you're optimistic about, what you're hopeful for with NIL. So in 30 seconds or so, what you are hopeful for with the future of it.
Yeah, I think it's a start of providing student athletes an opportunity to recognize the value they bring to campuses, and to the communities at large. So, like I said, lots of really good things are happening, certainly for improvement. I do hope there's a congressional solution to this to sort of standardize and create a level playing field, where right now it does feel a little chaotic. So long term, I hope Congress can help us make some sense of what's that right balance of education and opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dan.
But I can't give you a March Madness prediction. No, I'm sorry.
I figured you needed to stay neutral on that. So that's no, totally understand. Dan, what are you hopeful for?
Thanks, Win. Obviously I would echo some of Scott's sentiments. In the long term, I think there needs to be that standardization, across the board, and that may have to come from the federal government. But I think what gives me hope is this is such an important topic right now, and for as much as the money leads the way in a lot of the discussions, I think maybe to kind of pseudo answer one or two of the questions around education. There are so many companies, so many individuals, both inside the athletic department, outside the athletic department, that are doing everything they can, the social media platforms now, to educate student athletes as well as their families on the way in. And I think that gives me a lot of hope that in the long run, we will see some great success out of this. And being a former small business owner and going back to some of the statements made, I think anything as early as possible that can be done to help students and student athletes learn about financial management and starting a business and understanding contracts will outweigh some of the negatives in the long run.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Dr. Ofobu, what are you hopeful for?
I'm hopeful that, so I'm watching the women's tournament, and I'm hoping that one of the winners, at least, I'm hoping that the Carolinas win. I'll say that. I'll be good with NC State or South Carolina. But in regards to NIL, I am hopeful that I think it's a good sign that NIL legislation and policy is on people's minds. And I think, the policy implementation is a good first step in having these conversations about how can we create more equitable opportunities across the board, across sports, across racial lines, across divisions, for student athletes to, going back to what Scott said, realize and bring realize the value that they hold in this market, and make sure that they're finally getting a piece of the pot, right? For so long, everyone around athletes have been profiting off of this system, but the athlete. So I think when we can get into conversations about how to make this more equitable for all student athletes, I think we'll finally be on the track to making college sports a space where, regardless of gender, regardless of race, everyone can get an education and, develop those skills that are going to stay with them and support them on their journey beyond college sports.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I've seen some people drop in the chat, anything from UNC to South Carolina. I saw someone drop Notre Dame in there. I don't know that this is their year, but if that's who you're rooting for, go for it. And then I saw a few SEC people. We are in ACC territory, but I know the Hunt Institute is nationwide. So, and I moved here from Tennessee, so I will give some credit to the SEC. But no, really appreciate our panelists being a part of this. Before we close out, I do just want to remind you of some upcoming webinars that we have coming up. So in March 17th at 2 p.m., we have I think it shared the wrong screen. Well, sorry about that. So on March 17th at 2 p.m., we have our homeroom webinar looking at human capital in the 21st century, aligning education with future workforce needs. Then on Tuesday, the 22nd of March, we have our race in education, that shameless plug I did earlier, supporting HBCU student body presidents. March 29th, we have a great joint conversation between our early childhood team and our higher ed team, looking at the role of higher education in preparing early childhood education workforce. And then we'll be back with our post-secondary webinars in April 12th, looking at expanding the circle, Indigenous student access and persistence in higher education. So great conversations coming up. And as always, follow us on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn at the Hunt Institute to stay up to date on all our work. Thanks again to our panelists, and we look forward to continuing our partnerships with you all. But thanks for giving us your time today. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and enjoy basketball.